I'm Madison, 34. My birthday party in our Cherry Creek home was supposed to be perfect. 60 guests, craft cocktails, custom decorations, until my brother showed up late, hurled champagne across the dessert table, shattered my crystal sculpture, and screamed, "This is what you get for thinking you're better than everyone." What would you do if your own sibling humiliated you at your biggest celebration? The backyard had never looked better. String lights created a warm canopy over our patio, and the caterers had outdone themselves with tapas stations and a bar featuring Denver's best craft cocktails. I'd spent weeks planning every detail from the playlist, humming softly through hidden speakers to the centerpiece, a custom crystal sculpture my husband had commissioned its facets, catching the light like frozen starlight. It represented everything I'd built from nothing. By 9 that evening, conversation flowed as smoothly as the drinks. My colleagues from the startup mingled with neighbors, old college friends from CU, Boulder, and family members I hadn't seen in months. I moved through the crowd in my new dress, accepting congratulations and compliments, feeling for once like I could simply enjoy what I'd achieved without apology. Then I saw him. My brother stood by the back gate, 45 minutes late as usual. He hadn't bothered to change, same faded band shirt. He'd probably slept in jeans with deliberate tears that weren't fashionable anymore. While other guests held elegant glasses, he grabbed a beer from the cooler and positioned himself in the shadows near the garden, watching. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. This was my night. I'd earned it through countless 18-hour days, coding, pitching to skeptical investors and building a tech company that now employed 20 people. I wasn't going to let his sulking ruin it. My husband caught my eye from across the patio and gave me an encouraging nod. He knew the history, the years of lending money that never came back, the constant disappointment. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about celebrating how far we'd come. At 9:30, I clinked a fork against my glass. The conversations quieted, faces turning toward me with warm expectation. Thank you all for being here. I began my voice carrying across the yard. When I started my company 6 years ago in a cramped apartment, I never imagined the explosion of glass cut through my words. My brother had grabbed a full champagne flute and hurled it at the dessert table. It shattered against the custom cake stand, sending fragments across the macarons and chocolate-covered strawberries. Before anyone could react, he strode to the gift table where my crystal sculpture Saturday. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," he said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. He lifted the sculpture, that beautiful, delicate piece my husband had spent months designing, and brought it down hard on the table's edge. The crash was devastating. Crystal exploded across the patio, catching the string lights in 1,000 painful reflections. Guests gasped, stepped back, pulled children behind them. My carefully planned evening fractured into chaos. "This is what you get," my brother continued, his face twisted with years of resentment I'd tried to ignore. "Acting superior, looking down on everyone who isn't as perfect as Madison." My father rushed forward not to comfort me or address the destruction, but to wrap his arms around my brother. "He's just letting it out," Dad said to the stunned crowd, as if that explained everything. "He's been under pressure." My mother nodded from her spot near the door, her eyes soft with concern for him, not for me. Neither asked if I was okay. Neither looked at the destroyed gifts or the horrified faces of my guests. My husband stepped forward, jaw tight, ready to intervene, but I touched his arm. "Not here. Not now, not in front of everyone." "Please, everyone," I managed, forcing my voice to stay level. "Let's move inside. The caterers have coffee and more desserts in the kitchen." People began to drift away from the carnage, murmuring sympathetically. Ryan, my colleague, squeezed my shoulder as he passed. Sarah from my development team looked like she wanted to say something but didn't know what. I stood there surrounded by glittering shards of what had been my perfect evening, watching my parents guide my brother to a chair like he was the victim. My husband started collecting larger pieces of crystal, his movements careful and controlled. "I'll get the broom," he said quietly, but I knew he was really asking if I was all right. "I'll be inside in a minute," I told him. After he left, I remained alone on the patio, staring at the destruction. Champagne still dripped from the dessert table. The cake, which had cost $300 and featured delicate sugarwork, sat ruined. But it wasn't about the money or even the gifts. It was about the pattern I'd allowed to continue for far too long. That night, after the last guest had offered awkward condolences and left after my parents had taken my brother home without a word of apology, after my husband and I had swept up every piece of crystal we could find, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop. The clock showed 12:47 in the morning, but I wasn't tired. I was done. Growing up in Denver in the early 2000s, I was always the responsible one. While other kids spent summers at camps or pools, I worked at a local bookstore saving every dollar for college. My brother, 3 years younger, spent those same summers sleeping until noon and practicing guitar riffs that never quite formed into songs. Our childhood home in Park Hill was modest, a brick ranch where my parents, both teachers, stretched every paycheck. I remember doing homework at the kitchen table while my brother watched TV in the living room, volume cranked high enough to shake the walls. When Mom asked him to turn it down, Dad would intervene. Let him be a kid, he'd say, as if being considerate was somehow adult behavior I'd adopted too early. I got into CU Boulder on partial scholarship, supplementing with student loans I'm still paying off. My brother enrolled in community college for music production, dropped out after one semester, then spent the next year finding himself while living in my parents' basement. They never pushed him. Artists need time to develop. Mom would say, though, I never saw him develop anything except excuses. After college, I worked 70-hour weeks at a Denver tech firm, learning to code properly, understanding business models, saving every penny I could. My brother bounced between coffee shops and music stores, never lasting more than 3 months anywhere. The corporate world doesn't understand creativity, he'd tell anyone who'd listen, usually while borrowing $20 for gas. 6 years ago, I took the leap. Using my savings and a loan that required putting everything on the line, I founded my startup. Those early days were brutal coding, until 3 a.m, living on ramen and determination, pitching to investors who barely glanced up from their phones. My husband, then my boyfriend, would bring me dinner to the cramped office space I'd rented in Reno, sitting with me while I debugged code. 4 years ago, my brother started his pattern. It began, innocently enough, a call asking for $200 to fix his car. I've got a gig lined up, he promised. I'll pay you back next month. The gig never materialized, but another request did. $300 for studio time, $500 for a new amplifier that would change everything. By then, my startup had landed its first major client. Money was still tight, every dollar went back into the business, but I had a steady income. My parents knew this. Your brother's struggling, Mom would say during our monthly dinners. You're doing so well. Can't you help him out? The requests escalated. $1,000 for a demo recording that never got finished, $2,000 for networking at South by Southwest, though his Instagram showed mostly parties and expensive drinks. Each time the promises came thick, this was the opportunity, the connection, the breakthrough he needed. My husband watched it happen with increasing frustration. You're enabling him, he'd say, after each transfer. He's 30 years old. When does he take responsibility? But I'd grown up being the responsible one, the one who fixed things, who kept peace. It felt like abandoning family to say no. The total crept up to $22,000 over 4 years. I kept a spreadsheet, though I never told anyone about it. Each entry included his promise to repay the reason for the loan and the actual outcome. The pattern was clear. Money vanished into bar tabs, new clothes equipment that gathered dust. His social media told the story: endless nights out, top-shelf liquor, vintage guitars he'd play once and abandon. Meanwhile, I worked 18-hour days. My startup grew from 3 employees to 20. We moved from the cramped Reno space to a proper office downtown. I paid myself less than I paid my junior developers, pouring everything back into growth. My brother never asked about the business, never congratulated me on milestones, never showed interest unless he needed something. 6 weeks before my 34th birthday, the breaking point came. I was in my office reviewing contracts for our biggest client, yet a deal that would secure the company's future, when my phone rang. My brother's voice was different this time, more demanding than asking. I need $7,500, he said without preamble. There's a vintage guitar, a genuine Gibson from the 60s. This is it, Madison. This is the instrument that'll change everything. I stared at the contracts on my desk, thinking about the 60-hour weeks my team had pulled to land this client. I can't, I said simply. Can't or won't. His voice turned sharp. You're sitting in your fancy office living in Cherry Creek and you can't help your own brother. I've helped you for 4 years, I said. $22,000 of help. You keeping track, he laughed bitterly. Of course you are. Perfect Madison, with her spreadsheets and her success. You think you're better than everyone, don't you? I didn't answer. What was the point? He'd already decided who I was, the sister who'd abandoned family values for money, who'd chosen success over loyalty. The truth that I'd sacrificed constantly, that success came from relentless work, not luck, wouldn't penetrate his narrative. After I hung up, my husband found me still sitting at my desk. He asked for more, he said. It wasn't a question. $7,500 this time, and you said no. I said no. He kissed the top of my head. Good. But it didn't feel good. It felt like waiting for a storm. 6 weeks before my 34th birthday, everything in my professional life was clicking into place. Our startup had just secured a contract with a Fortune 500 company, the kind of client that transforms a small business into a real player. I should have been celebrating, but instead I found myself managing the fallout from refusing my brother's request for $7,500. The calls from my parents started within hours of my conversation with him. First Dad, his teacher's voice, patient but pointed. Your brother tells me you won't help him with an investment opportunity, he said, as if buying a vintage guitar constituted an investment. This could be his big break, Madison. You know how hard it is for artists. I was standing in our Cherry Creek kitchen preparing dinner while my husband worked on his laptop at the counter. Dad, I've given him $22,000. How many big breaks does one person need? That's not fair, he said. You've had advantages he hasn't. College connections, that brain for business. He's trying to find his path. He's 31 years old, I said, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. When does trying become doing? Dad's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost connection. Finally, he said, your mother and I are disappointed in you, Madison. Family means sacrifice. After he hung up, I stood there holding my phone, the knife still in my other hand. My husband looked up from his work. Let me guess, he said, you're the bad guy again. Mom's call came the next morning while I was reviewing code. Unlike Dad's direct approach, hers was all soft edges and implied guilt. I worry about your brother, she said. He seemed so hopeful about this opportunity. Now he's devastated. You know he's sensitive. Sensitive doesn't pay rent, I said, then immediately regretted it. Madison. Her voice took on that wounded tone I'd heard throughout my childhood whenever I pushed back. Success isn't just about money. Your brother has gifts you don't understand. What I understand, I said carefully, is that he's had 4 years to turn those gifts into something sustainable using my money as a safety net. Your money, she repeated. Is that what family means to you? Keeping score, I wanted to tell her about the spreadsheet, about the promises broken, about watching him post pictures from expensive bars while claiming he couldn't afford groceries. But what was the point? In their narrative, I was the successful one who'd abandoned family values for corporate achievement. The weeks leading to my birthday were surprisingly quiet on the family front. My brother stopped texting entirely, no requests, no angry messages, nothing. Mom and Dad maintained surface-level contact, asking about work, but never about me. It felt like being excommunicated in slow motion. Meanwhile, I threw myself into the new contract implementation. My team worked overtime to deliver ahead of schedule. Sarah, one of my best developers, stayed late night after night, matching my dedication. Ryan coordinated with the client, smoothing over every concern with his easy charm. We were building something real, something that mattered. My husband noticed the family silence, too. It's like they're punishing you, he said one evening as we walked through Washington Park. You're the only one who's ever helped him, and somehow you're the villain. Maybe I am, I said, watching joggers pass in the fading light. Maybe good sisters don't keep spreadsheets. Maybe they just give. Until there's nothing left. He stopped walking, turned me to face him. Good sisters also don't enable destructive behavior. You've been more than fair. I wanted to believe him. But a lifetime of being the responsible one, the one who fixed things, the one who kept peace, it was hard to shake. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be my brother with another emergency, another request, another guilt trip. 3 nights before my party, I ran into a mutual friend at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. She mentioned seeing my brother at a music venue buying rounds for strangers, telling everyone about a big opportunity that fell through because of family drama. The vintage guitar apparently had already been sold to someone else if it had ever been available at all. He seemed really upset, she said carefully, clearly not wanting to take sides. Said something about your birthday party. He's invited, I said, though. We hadn't spoken since the phone call. He's always invited. She looked relieved. Good. Family stuff is so hard. The morning of my birthday, I woke up anxious. My husband had been planning the party for months, the catering, the guests, the custom crystal sculpture he'd unveiled the night before, its facets catching morning light through our bedroom window. It was supposed to represent my journey, he said, from scattered pieces to something whole and brilliant. What if he doesn't come? I asked as we set up the backyard. Then he doesn't come, my husband said simply. This is your night, your success, your celebration, but I knew he would come. My brother never missed an opportunity to make himself the center of attention, especially when that attention should be on someone else. I just didn't know what form his appearance would take. As guests began arriving that evening, I tried to push the anxiety away. These were people who'd supported me, who'd believed in my vision, who'd celebrated each milestone without demanding payment in return. This was my chosen family, I realized, the one built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Then I saw my parents' car pull up my brother in the back seat. At 12:47 in the morning, while Denver slept, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open. The house still smelled of scattered appetizers and spilled champagne. Broken crystal glinted in the trash bag my husband had tied up by the door. The caterers had cleaned what they could, but the emotional wreckage remained. My husband sat beside me, not saying anything, just being there. His presence steadied me as I logged into our bank account. For 4 years, I'd maintained a separate account for my brother's music career. $18,000 currently sat there, supposedly earmarked for studio time, equipment, and professional development. Money I'd transferred from my own savings, piece by piece, enabling his fantasy while my startup struggled through its early years. You sure about this? My husband asked quietly, watching me navigate to the transfer screen. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. With deliberate keystrokes, I moved every cent from that account back to my primary savings, $18,000. It took less than 30 seconds to undo 4 years of financial enabling. The confirmation screen blinked, and just like that, his safety net was gone, but I wasn't done. I opened my email and pulled up a thread from 2 months ago with a Los Angeles record label executive I'd met at a Denver tech conference. He'd been interested in my brother's demo, the one I'd paid $3,000 to produce, and I'd vouched for him personally, leveraging my company's growing reputation to secure him a meeting. They'd offered a development deal contingent on him delivering 3 original tracks within 6 months. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. This was different from taking back money that was mine. This was actively closing a door I'd opened for him. I thought about him standing in my backyard surrounded by the crystal he'd shattered while my father comforted him like he was the victim. I thought about 60 guests watching my birthday turn into his theatrical breakdown. I thought about $22,000 spent on bar tabs and vintage guitars that gathered dust. I started typing, "Dear Marcus, I need to retract my recommendation regarding my brother's development deal. After careful consideration, I don't believe he has the professional discipline required for your label's standards. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes and take full responsibility for the misjudgment. Best regards, Madison." I hit send before I could second guess myself. "That's going to cause a reaction," my husband said, reading over my shoulder. "Everything causes a reaction with him," I replied. "At least this reaction will be honest." We sat there in the quiet kitchen, the clock ticking toward 1 in the morning. Outside, Cherry Creek was silent except for the occasional car passing on the distant main road. This neighborhood had been our dream when we bought the house last year, proof that the startup was succeeding, that the sacrifices were paying off. Now it felt like a fortress under siege by my own family. "You should get some sleep," my husband said, closing my laptop gently. "Tomorrow's going to be rough." But I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the pattern I'd finally broken. Every dollar I'd given my brother had come with strings of hope that this time would be different, that this investment would spark his transformation from dreamer to doer. Every dollar had been a vote for a future that never materialized. At 7:45 the next morning, my phone exploded with texts. I was already dressed for work, coffee in hand, when the first one came through. "What did you do?" Followed immediately by, "The account is empty. This is theft. Then you vindictive witch. You planned this." And the label just emailed, "You sabotaged me." And finally, "You'll pay for this." I read each message without responding, then set my phone to silent. My husband read them over my shoulder, his jaw tightening with each escalation. "Should we be concerned about that last one?" he asked. "It's just noise," I said, though. My hands shook slightly as I picked up my laptop bag. "He's all performance, no follow-through, always has been." The drive to my downtown office felt longer than usual. I found myself checking mirrors, half expecting to see my brother's beat-up sedan following me. But the only thing following me was the weight of what I'd done, not guilt exactly, but the recognition that I'd finally drawn a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At the office, I threw myself into work. We had a client presentation that afternoon, and I needed to review every slide, every code sample, every budget projection. Sarah noticed my intensity and didn't ask about the party, though I'm sure she'd seen enough to have questions. Ryan brought me coffee around 10, set it on my desk with a simple, "You okay?" When I nodded, he let it be. The texts from my brother continued throughout the morning, each one angrier than the last. I didn't read them anymore, just saw the notifications piling up. Then around noon, they stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the rage. My mother called at lunch. I let it go to voicemail. Dad called an hour later. Same response. They could leave their disappointment in digital form. I had a company to run, employees who depended on me, clients who expected excellence. I'd spent enough years managing family drama. Today, I chose my actual responsibilities. The presentation went flawlessly. The client signed off on the next phase, a 6-figure contract that would keep us stable through the next year. My team celebrated with champagne, a different bottle than the one my brother had weaponized the night before. I smiled, thanked everyone, acted normal, but inside I knew this was just the beginning. My brother didn't handle rejection well, and I just rejected him in the most final way possible. The real confrontation was still coming. 2 days after I cut off his funding, my brother took our family drama online. Ryan showed me the first TikTok video during our morning stand-up meeting, his expression apologetic but concerned. "You need to see this," he said, handing me his phone. My brother sat in his car looking directly at the camera with practiced vulnerability. "My sister thinks she's better than everyone," he said, his voice cracking just enough to seem genuine. "I've been trying to make it in music for years, and just when I had a real shot, she sabotaged me. Pulled my funding, called the label, destroyed my dreams, because she's jealous that I might actually succeed at something that matters." The video had 20,000 views. The comments were split, some calling me heartless, others sensing manipulation. He'd tagged it with hashtags like family drama, toxic siblings, and struggling artist. His follower count, previously in the hundreds, was climbing rapidly. "There are more," Ryan said quietly. I handed back his phone. "I don't need to see them." But avoiding them became impossible. By lunch, 3 more videos had gone viral. In one, he held up a photo from my birthday party from before his meltdown, pointing out the excess of my lifestyle while he struggled. He conveniently didn't mention the $22,000 I'd given him or the designer clothes visible in his own frame. Sarah approached my desk that afternoon, hesitant. "Madison, there's someone in the lobby asking for you. Your brother," I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see him in the reception area pacing like a caged animal. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wild. Our security guard, an older man named Tom, stood nearby, alert but not yet intervening. "I'll handle it," I said, standing. My husband appeared as if summoned. He'd been in a meeting with our CFO in the next room. He fell into step beside me without a word. We walked to the lobby together, a united front. "You can't hide behind your corporate fortress," my brother said loudly as we approached, ensuring everyone in earshot could hear. "You owe me an explanation." "This isn't the place," I said, calmly aware of employees pretending not to watch. "If you want to talk, we can meet somewhere private," he interrupted. "So there are no witnesses when you try to justify ruining my life." My husband stepped forward. "You need to leave, now." My brother's face flushed red. "Or what you'll call security, have me arrested, post that online too. No one's posting anything I said. But you are disrupting a place of business. My employees don't deserve this. Your employees," he spat. "Your business, your success. Everything's about you, isn't it, Tom?" The security guard moved closer, hand on his radio. My brother noticed and backed toward the door, but not before delivering his parting shot. "This isn't over. Everyone's gonna know what kind of person you really are." After he left, the office was silent. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes on me waiting to see how I'd handle this. I straightened my shoulders and addressed the room. I apologized for the disruption. Sometimes family situations spill into professional spaces despite our best efforts. Let's get back to work. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispers following in their wake. Sarah touched my arm gently as she passed. "We're here for you," she said simply. That evening, my husband showed me something else, a crowdfunding page my brother had created. "Support an artist betrayed by family," the title read. The description painted me as a corporate villain who'd crushed his dreams out of spite. He'd set the goal at $50,000, claiming it would replace the funding I'd stolen and help him rebuild. It had already raised $1,500. He's turned this into performance art, my husband said, disgust evident in his voice. Ryan called later that night with another revelation. He'd been doing some digging, a side effect of his protective nature. Your parents paid off $8,500 in credit card debt for him last week, he said. A friend who works at the bank mentioned it. They didn't want you to know. I stood in our kitchen phone, pressed to my ear, processing this betrayal. While I was being painted as the heartless sister online, my parents were secretly funding him. While they guilted me about family responsibility, they were enabling the very behavior they claimed to want changed. Madison, you still there? Yeah, I said, finally. Thanks for telling me. There's more, Ryan said hesitantly. The videos are getting picked up by larger accounts. One of those family drama compilation channels featured him. It has 2 million followers. I ended the call and found my husband in his office, working late on his own projects. He looked up as I entered, saw my face, and immediately closed his laptop. How bad, he asked. 2 million people might think I'm evil by tomorrow, I said, sinking into the chair across from him. My parents paid off his debt while telling me I'm selfish, and somehow I'm still the villain in this story. He came around the desk, pulled me to my feet, and wrapped me in a hug. You know what's real, he said against my hair? The people who matter know what's real. But as I stood there in his arms, I wondered if that was enough. My brother had turned our private conflict into public entertainment, and I couldn't control the narrative. All I could do was weather it. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't respond online. I wouldn't make my own videos or defend myself in comments. I would simply continue living my life, running my company, and letting my actions speak louder than his performance. It was the quiet choice, the dignified choice. But quiet dignity doesn't trend on social media. Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after my birthday, the doorbell rang. My husband and I were in the living room reviewing plans for the company's next quarter. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing on our porch, their faces set with determination. We need to talk, Dad said as I opened the door. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, Mom, following close behind, clutching her purse like armor. They settled on our couch while my husband and I remained standing. The power dynamic felt important, somehow them coming to our space uninvited to deliver whatever message they'd rehearsed on the drive over. You've gone too far, Dad said, his teacher's voice, carrying the authority he'd used in classrooms for 30 years. Your brother is struggling and you're making it worse. You need to forgive him and help him get back on his feet. Mom nodded her eyes, soft but insistent. He's your family, Madison. You can't just turn your back on him. I felt my husband tense beside me, ready to jump in, but I touched his arm lightly. This was my fight. I gave him $22,000 over 4 years, I said evenly. I've connected him with industry professionals, paid for equipment, covered his rent multiple times. How much more help does one person need? That's not the point, Dad said, shifting forward. Family doesn't keep score, but family should keep promises I countered. Every dollar came with his promise to pay it back, to use it for his career to finally get serious. Every promise was broken. My husband couldn't stay quiet any longer. You paid off $8,500 in credit card debt for him last week, he said, his voice controlled but edged with frustration, while telling Madison she's selfish for finally setting boundaries. How is that fair? Mom flinched, but Dad's jaw tightened. How we help our son is our business. It becomes my business when you attack me for doing less than what you're doing in secret, I said. You enable him while demanding I do the same. He's trying, Mom said, her voice trembling. The videos he's making, the crowdfunding he's trying to rebuild after what you did. What I did, I felt heat rise in my chest. He destroyed my birthday party. He shattered a gift my husband spent months designing. He humiliated me in front of 60 people. And you comforted him like he was the victim. He was upset, Dad said. You just pulled his funding. My funding, I interrupted. My money that I earned building a company from nothing while he played at being an artist. Money I could have invested in my business, my employees, my future. The room went quiet. My parents sat there looking older than I'd noticed before, worn down by years of managing my brother's chaos. But I couldn't feel sorry for them. They'd chosen this dynamic, fostered it, maintained it at my expense. I love you both, I said finally, my voice softer but firm. But I'm done. I'm not giving him another dollar. I'm not opening another door for him. I'm not apologizing for protecting my peace and my resources. Mom's eyes welled with tears. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more, I said. My husband moved to stand beside me, a unified front. Madison has been more than generous. Your son is 31 years old. It's time he took responsibility for his own life. Dad stood abruptly, his face flushed. You're being selfish, he said, the words sharp as glass. Both of you. Success has made you cold. No, I said, meeting his eyes. Success has shown me the difference between helping and enabling, between family and manipulation, between love and obligation. Mom stood too, reaching for Dad's arm. Please, Madison, reconsider. He's your only brother. And I'm your only daughter, I said. When do I get the same consideration you give him? When do my boundaries matter as much as his needs? They didn't answer. They couldn't. We all knew the truth in their eyes. I was the strong one who didn't need protection, while my brother was the fragile artist who required constant support. The dynamic was so entrenched that questioning it felt like betrayal. They left without another word, Mom crying quietly, Dad's shoulders rigid with anger. I watched from the window as they drove away, probably heading straight to my brother's apartment, to comfort him, to strategize about how to deal with their heartless daughter. My husband pulled me into his arms. You did the right thing, he said. Then why does it feel so awful, I asked against his shoulder. Because doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are rarely the same, he said. They've spent years training you to feel guilty for having boundaries. It's going to take time to unlearn that. That evening, we ordered takeout and ate in silence, both processing the confrontation. My phone buzzed occasionally, texts from my brother, my parents, even some extended family members who'd been recruited to the cause. I didn't read any of them. We should consider moving, my husband said suddenly. Not because of them, but for us. A fresh start. I looked around our Cherry Creek home, the place we'd worked so hard to afford. It was beautiful, but it was also becoming a battlefield. Every room held echoes of that disastrous party, every corner a reminder of family dynamics I couldn't fix. Littleton, I suggested, close enough for work, but far enough for peace. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. Let's start looking tomorrow. A month later, the dust had settled in unexpected ways. Ryan called me during lunch with an update I'd been expecting but dreading. The LA label officially dropped him, he said. My contact there said your brother missed every deadline they set for the demo tracks, never even sent rough cuts. I stood in my new office space we'd expanded to the floor above a sign of our continued growth looking out at downtown Denver. I'm not surprised, I said, though part of me had hoped he'd prove me wrong, that losing my support would somehow spark genuine effort. There's more, Ryan continued. He's working at that bistro on 17th Street, serving tables. The information sat heavy in my chest. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a strange hollowness. My brother, who'd spent 4 years claiming he was one opportunity away from musical stardom, was now clearing plates and refilling water glasses. The same work he deemed beneath him when I'd suggested it years ago. Sarah knocked on my door holding a tablet. The client loved our latest deployment, she said, smiling. They want to expand the contract. That's great, I said, forcing enthusiasm. She deserved my full attention, my celebration of our team's success. Set up a meeting for next week. We'll discuss scaling. After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about trajectories. My company was thriving, 25 employees now, 3 major clients, enough revenue to pay everyone well, including myself. My brother's crowdfunding had stalled at $1,500, the TikTok views dwindling as people moved on to fresher drama. He'd bet everything on public sympathy, and the public had a short attention span. That evening, my husband and I stood in our Cherry Creek home, surrounded by boxes. We'd found a place in Littleton, a beautiful craftsman with mature trees and a sense of privacy our current home no longer provided. The movers were coming tomorrow. You sure about not giving them the new address? My husband asked, taping another box shut. They can have my office information if there's an emergency, I said. But our home needs to be ours. We'd already changed phone plans, adding filters that sent calls from family members straight to voicemail unless they called 3 times in succession or compromised for actual emergencies. It felt extreme, but so did showing up, uninvited, to demand I sacrifice my boundaries. The next morning, the movers arrived early. As they loaded our carefully packed life into their truck, our neighbor mentioned she'd seen my brother drive by several times over the past week, slowing down to look at our house, but never stopping. Seemed like he was checking if you were home, she said, concern creasing her face. Everything okay? We're handling it. I said, grateful we'd be gone soon. The drive to Littleton took 40 minutes long enough to feel like a real transition. Our new neighborhood was quiet, filled with families and retirees who minded their own business. The house sat back from the street, sheltered by evergreens that provided natural privacy. As we unpacked, I found the shattered remains of something I'd kept a photo from my brother's 13th birthday, both of us smiling before everything got complicated. I'd been 16, about to start applying to colleges, and he'd looked at me like I hung the moon. When had that admiration turned to resentment, I threw the photo away. Setting up the new home office, I made conscious choices. No family photos on the desk, no reminders of obligations I'd carried too long. Just pictures from company retreats, my wedding moments that represented joy rather than duty. My husband found me arranging books on shelves, alphabetizing them with unnecessary precision. Ryan says, "Your brother's been posting again," he said gently. "Want to know?" "No," I said immediately, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes. I should know what's out there." He pulled up the videos on his phone. My brother in his bistro uniform talking about redemption and starting over. The comments were different now, less sympathy, more skepticism. Someone had linked to my company's website, pointing out that I'd built something real while he performed victimhood. The narrative was shifting without my involvement. The internet has a longer memory than we think, my husband said. People can see patterns. That evening, we sat on our new deck looking out at a backyard that had never witnessed family drama. The previous owners had left a fire pit, and we lit it watching flames dance in the Colorado twilight. "I blocked his number today," I said quietly, "and Mom's, and Dad's." My husband took my hand. "How do you feel, free?" I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Guilty about feeling free, but still free. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But maybe that was the point. Some bridges need to burn to light the way forward. The next morning, I woke up in our new bedroom with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. No text messages, no guilt-laden voicemails, no crisis to manage, except the ones I chose at work. I made coffee in our new kitchen, appreciating the silence. Outside, a neighbor walked their dog waving when they saw me. They didn't know my story, my family drama, my brother's viral videos. I was just the new neighbor who worked in tech. It was a small thing, that anonymity, but it felt like the beginning of something. Not an ending, despite everything I'd closed off, but a genuine start. The life I'd been building while managing other people's chaos could finally be just mine. 6 months after that birthday party, I stood in my new Littleton backyard watching the sun set over the mountains. The garden I'd started was beginning to bloom tomatoes and herbs that I'd actually have time to tend now that I wasn't constantly managing other people's crises. My husband was grilling dinner, the smoke mixing with the scent of pine from the surrounding trees. My company had just closed another major contract. We were up to 30 employees now, with plans to hire 10 more by year's end. Sarah had been promoted to lead developer, and Ryan was heading up our new client relations division. The office hummed with purpose, with people who showed up every day ready to build something meaningful. I ran into someone interesting at the coffee shop today, my husband said, flipping salmon on the grill. A woman who recognized me from your old TikTok drama. She said she'd been following the story. I tensed, waiting for the judgment, the questions about how I could abandon family. She said you gave her courage to cut off her toxic sister, he continued. She'd been enabling her for years, draining her savings, ignoring her own needs. Your story made her realize she wasn't alone. I sat down on our deck chair, processing this unexpected connection. I never wanted to be anyone's example, I said. Sometimes we don't choose what we represent, he replied. We just live our truth and others find meaning in it. My phone buzzed with an email from Marcus, the LA label executive. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity won. Wanted you to know he'd written your honesty saved us from a costly mistake. We've since signed 2 artists you recommended from Denver's tech conference showcase. Both are thriving. Your ability to recognize both talent and character is rare. Thank you. I forwarded it to my husband, who read it and smiled. You're still opening doors, he said, just for people who'll actually walk through them. That evening, we sat on the deck planning our Hawaii vacation, finally taking that trip we dreamed about. 2 weeks in Maui, no work emails, no family drama, just us and the ocean. I'd promoted Sarah to acting CEO for the duration, trusting her completely with the company I'd built. Remember when you asked what I'd do if I were in your shoes? My husband said, suddenly, referring to that night 6 months ago. I would have snapped much sooner. You gave him 4 years and $22,000 worth of chances. Most people wouldn't have lasted 4 months. I thought family meant never giving up. I said watching stars appear in the darkening sky. But I learned that family isn't an obligation without limits. It's a choice that should go both directions. Have you checked if he's still at the bistro? My husband asked carefully. No, I said. That's not my story to follow anymore. But I had heard things through the Denver network. My brother's viral moment had passed his crowdfunding page, abandoned at $1,500. The bistro job had lasted 3 months before he quit, claiming management didn't understand his artistic temperament. Last anyone had heard, he was living back with our parents, planning his next big move that would show everyone, especially me, what they'd missed. My parents hadn't tried to contact me since I'd blocked their numbers. Sometimes I wondered if they thought about me, if they recognized the irony of losing the daughter who'd always been there while protecting the son who only took. But wondering wasn't the same as wanting to know. I got an email from Mom, my husband admitted quietly. To my work address. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to upset you. I looked at him waiting. She said they miss you, that your brother is getting help, that they want to reconcile. Getting help or getting money, I asked, the old bitterness creeping in. Does it matter, he responded. You've made your choice. Their patterns aren't your responsibility anymore. He was right. Whether my brother was genuinely changing or just crafting a new narrative for sympathy, it didn't affect my life. I built something real, a company that employed 30 people, a marriage based on mutual respect, a home that felt like sanctuary rather than battlefield. Setting boundaries hadn't been selfish, it had been survival. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run through Littleton's quiet streets. Other runners nodded as they passed that simple acknowledgement of shared effort. No one knew about the family I'd walked away from or the guilt I'd carried for years. I was just Madison, the tech CEO who'd moved here 6 months ago and kept her garden surprisingly well-maintained for someone so busy. Back home, I found my husband making breakfast, overnight oats, with fresh berries from our garden. Ready for the partners meeting today, he asked. More than ready, I said. We were announcing employee profit sharing, something I'd wanted to implement since the beginning, but couldn't afford until now. Every person who'd helped build the company would share in its success. As I dressed for work, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. 34 years old, CEO of a thriving company, married to someone who understood that love meant support, not sacrifice. The woman looking back at me had fought for this life, had chosen it deliberately despite every guilt trip and manipulation. My phone showed no missed calls, no crisis texts, no viral videos to address, just calendar reminders and team messages about exciting projects. The silence that had once felt like abandonment now felt like peace. I thought about that shattered crystal sculpture from my birthday, how my brother had destroyed something beautiful because he couldn't stand to see me shine. But here's what he never understood. You can't shatter someone's light by breaking their gifts. The light comes from within, from the choices we make every day to build rather than destroy, to grow rather than stagnate, to protect our peace rather than sacrifice it for others' chaos. Ready, my husband asked, car keys in hand. Ready, I said and meant it. I'd never again let someone else's chaos define my life. Setting boundaries had given me back my freedom, and I was finally truly ready to live. 6 months later, standing in my Littleton garden with dirty hands and fresh vegetables, I realized something profound about family and boundaries. Love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. It doesn't mean funding someone's dreams while they destroy yours. And it certainly doesn't mean accepting abuse disguised as need. The journey from that shattered birthday party to this peaceful afternoon had taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stop enabling destructive patterns. My brother's viral videos had called me heartless, but my heart had never been fuller. Full of genuine connections with people who contributed rather than consumed, who celebrated success rather than resented it, who understood that relationships should flow both ways. To those of you who've been where I was caught between family obligation and self-preservation, know this: choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is destruction. Your success isn't something to apologize for, and your boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation of healthy relationships. What would you choose? Family peace at any price, or personal peace at the cost of letting go? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more real-life narratives about difficult choices and unexpected freedom.